Hello, I'm George Liston, CA. Welcome to Dialogue, a program that explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. In North American culture, a very high place is reserved for the self-made man or woman. In a very real sense, we are all that person, given the myriad daily choices we make that together compose the person we present to the world. And in the vast offerings of consumer culture, we find the objects, clothes, cosmetics, cars, and thousands of other products that define our sense of individuality as we choose among them. This amounts to a creative and complex link between daily acts that may seem trivial and that deepest of all existential queries about finding and expressing our own sense of the meaning of life. All of this is brought forward in a new book, The Toothpaste of Immortality, Self-Construction in the Consumer Age by Elemer Hankiss. Elemer Hankiss, welcome to Dialogue.
Hi. Hi. Hello.
Let me hold up this book for everyone to see. It's a very interesting cover, very attractive cover, and allows me to say this, Elemer, right from the start. This is a book about us. It's about the reader. It's about the choices that we make. It struck me that way. Each day as we construct ourselves. And if you take that all together, it's a statement about the human condition. To start our conversation, why is these choices, why is all of this so powerfully linked to the consumer culture? I mean, why is consumption such a force in our doing this?
Well, we live in the consumer age, and 24 hours a day, all the media and everything is broadcasting the message that we should consume. Mm-hmm. So we cannot escape. Right. From this, how would I say, from this duty to consume. Mm-hmm. There are even great scholars who say that now a good citizen has to consume because consumption keeps up the economy of a country. Right.
And what you bring forth in this book, I think very entertainingly as well as very astutely, is that the sum total of these choices we make each day, these choices of consumption, becomes ourself, becomes our presentation of ourself to the world, which is very, very fascinating to me. It almost sounds like I shop, therefore I am, a sort of thought.
Yeah, in a way, sure. And we do it without really being aware what we are doing. As you mentioned in your introductory words, that in a way every human being lives on two levels. One is the trivial level of everyday activities. We work, we jog, we raise our children, we talk, we consume. Mm-hmm. But there's an underlying layer which I call at the existential level of our lives, where we are struggling with the quote-unquote ultimate questions of the human condition.
That's very well said, Elemer, and that's one of the great lessons of this book, I mean, that we realized right from the very start of it. And it leads to my next question, because it seems to me that these underlying existential questions you mentioned, still affecting us as human beings, always affected us as human beings, and perhaps in ages past are coming to grips with this in a more transcendental way we did in other ways. Perhaps, now, I guess what I'm struggling to say is, did we use religion or other sorts of means to find ourselves as opposed to consumption?
Yes, there is a radical change in Western civilization. In the last 50 or 60 years, the last half a century, there has been a radical change in our civilization. Mm-hmm. And from a kind of communal kind of culture, we shifted to a kind of individualistic culture. Before we had a framework, the framework of God or history or society, which was the source of the purpose and meaning of our lives. Mm-hmm. And now these frameworks have become weaker. They still exist. For many people, God or society or a great cause is important and gives her or him meaning. But many people who are left alone, mm-hmm. For whom the old institutions do not give the relevant answers to anguishing questions. Right. And they look for these questions, and the new civilization which is emerging, the civilization or culture of consumption, gives certain answers.
But it gives those answers, Elemer, to the individual.
Yeah.
In other words, so does it run the risk then of becoming a sort of a very selfish, inward, separate from humanity sort of phenomena? In other words, can it serve the common good if people are sort of individually seeking those answers without relation to the wider society in that sense?
That's true. If you look at the commercials in television, where practically the only social activity is to dancing together or consuming together, so society as it is in real life doesn't appear in commercials, for instance, which are so important a genre in our age. But it depends on societies. The impact of this new culture is different here in your country, in the US, than in my country or in a developing country in Africa or in Asia. Your country has traditionally quite strong social networks.
I see.
And social communities which can resist a too radical attack of this radical individualism.
Right, so they can sort of fit into this context. That gives some balance to it.
Yeah, certainly. In my country, the social structures have been destroyed by the communist regime for 40 years.
Hungary.
That's Hungary. And the society has become disintegrated. People, each individual has been left alone. And for her or for him, it's much more difficult to resist or to absorb and develop what he is getting from the media, from this new civilization.
That's very helpful, because in that answer, Elemer, you helped me understand a lot of what I've come to witness, I think we all have, in Eastern Europe and the countries of the former communist bloc, where we see consumption that looks like it's almost out of control in many ways. Tell me this, because as I said in the outset, this book affects the reader very personally. You can't say this is somebody else. If you read this book, you say, this is me, how am I doing these things? We get up in the morning, we may brush our teeth with Colgate toothpaste or put on our Burberry coats or whatever it is. But with each of these acts, we define ourselves as the day progresses. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But there's one comment you made at the early chapters I found fascinating. This self that we construct so rigidly each day tends to dissolve at night. That night is kind of and I thought of all what dreams and nightmares can do to people. And when you wake up in that sense of, who am I, what am I? That was quite striking.
That was a starting point for me to write a book. And I realized that, a question emerged for me and I ask it you now. When in the evening you go to sleep, why do you take leave from your family? You remain in the same home, in the same room perhaps, and even you say father to each other somehow, as if you went into a different world.
Yeah.
And each one is going into its individual loneliness, a different dark and unknown world during the night. And as you said, herself or himself is disintegrating during the night. And in the morning, we have to reconstruct ourselves from scratch. And that's quite amusing and quite difficult.
I don't know if there's a version in Hungary, but there's a traditional prayer that children recite in this country. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray that my God, my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray my God, my soul to take. As though you know you are going into a dangerous, uncharted territory.
Throughout Western civilization, these evening prayers spoke about the danger of night, that the evil spirits will come and God has to protect us during the night. And that's also in my country,
Fascinating stuff. Elemer, suppose, just as a sort of devil's advocate counter-argument, suppose someone said to you, well, Elemer, this is very interesting. I, of course, make these choices every day at such and such. But what about, in terms of self, who I think I am, what about things like life history, my thoughts, my experiences? Is there no sense in which these compose self?
Certainly, they come back. There is a kind of continuity of the self, according to some scholars. If you start to study the expert literature on the self, then you get lost very quickly, because there are people who say that we have a strong inner core. Max Weber, the famous German sociologist, said that we have a strong inner self, which is a kind of magnet, which always shows us the right direction and help us to make the good decisions.
Right.
Other people say that we have not just one self, but as many selves as we meet people. In each human relationship, we have a different self.
Well, could there be argument we have no self at all? We're simply...
Yes, and there are so-called no-self theories, which say that we have no self at all. And we are practically empty, and we have only roles, and the roles change according to the situations of our lives. And so these are two extremes.
Right.
And well, I personally believe that we have a kind of inner core, but also we have lots of roles and lots of cells. So there's a kind of interaction between the inner core and the peripheral different everyday selves.
Now, and in fact, I agree with you. Having read the book and giving it thought, I think I'm on your side on that. But then the question to me that is interesting is, why is this self important to us? You know, why do we have to do this, or why do we feel we have to do it, even subconsciously? Is it what? You speak later of the social gaze, you know, the being seen by other people. That's on the one end. The fear of death certainly is there. What is the reason that we do this?
Well, I think that we want to live. Well, every living being wants to
perpetuate himself,
to live, to be alive, and the self is the center of our, we feel so, the center of our lives, and we want to protect it and to develop it, and we want to have as much life as possible, because death is coming, and with death we may disappear or not, we don't know, and while we are alive we want to live as intensely as possible, and that's why the care for the self, which is a very important concept since the Greek philosophers Socrates and company, and Nietzsche and Foucault and other people, that we have to care for ourselves to live, to be able to live intensely and with a kind of authenticity.
Exactly. In fact, you have a very strong chapter in here on those philosophers and on this as an ancient, well, eternal need of humanity. But there's one thing that I felt that we might be lacking today with the consumer society, and that is the self-reflective aspect of creating the self. That may have been, one could argue that might have been stronger in the past. You know, dressing yourself and composing yourself is one thing. Thinking about who you are in the world critically is a different activity.
You are right. Even in Greek civilization, there was only a few people, the philosophers, who really cared for themselves, not the masses. Even the Renaissance, there were a couple of thousand people who lived a kind of Renaissance life, which was centered around or upon the self. And now in our mass society, there are very few people who have the ability and the education and the intention and the discipline to care for themselves, and it's very bad. And because now we have all the means, television could help a lot. Television could, or schools could teach people how to care for themselves, how they develop themselves, how to actualize themselves in a kind of authentic way.
Yeah, I love this point, because it also comes in the conclusion of your book when you say, you know, where do we go from here? How can we use these things to make this society more deeper than it otherwise might be? But before we even get there, I want to make a point about how you organize the book. The first part, I call it, we deal with the actor. The second part, we deal with the stage. In the first 7 chapters, I think we follow a young woman through her day, and we sort of recognize ourselves as she does things. And then we turn to the world in which she's operating and how it's changed. And I think everyone understands now that the young woman of the first chapters is, you know, carrying her briefcase, making her choices, using her lips, reading newspapers, everything we do to build herself. I think the point you make about this world in which she's doing it is fascinating. That you mentioned the Renaissance a moment ago, that we are now in what you call a proletarian Renaissance, a kind of 21st century reversioning of the 15th. What do you mean by that?
Yes, that is a kind of provocative term. I call our age, the consumer age, proletarian renaissance. It doesn't mean that the proletariat has been reborn. It means only that we now have a kind of mass renaissance. In the Renaissance of the 14th, 15th century, there were only a couple of thousand of people who had the means
to live like we do,
education, to live up the ideals of the Renaissance civilization. And now we have all the means and all the knowledge, all the skills with which we could live like Renaissance people, developing ourselves physically and spiritually and culturally and emotionally. The problem is if we really can profit from these opportunities. And there are lots of people, there are millions of people who are now living like the Medicis or like the great Renaissance women and men lived. Now there are hundreds of millions of people, but not enough.
Yeah.
So much more people could live like Renaissance.
And they could ask themselves deeper questions, because you have a chapter on celebrity that's also very, I want to mention that in a moment.
Yes.
Before I ask you that question, though, and speaking of this world, as you describe it, this proletarian Renaissance in which we are now living, at several points in the book, you make very strong mention, emphasis of September 11th as a date. Now, how does that figure in? Does that deepen the modern angst behind the consumption? Did it change the nature of our, what did it do?
Yes, on the one hand, it is a kind of turning point for many people. So before 9/11, many people lived in a kind of false security. They believe that the world is progressing, that this 19th century idea of infinite progress of humankind will go on indefinitely. And now this horrendous event came as a shock that maybe things may change, and this glorious evolution of mankind may stop or may be diverted. And that was a very important experience. Many people started, I think, to be more serious about their own lives and about the lives of their fellow citizens, that they are responsible, that life is not, well, infinite, that they have to face the problems of the human condition. So that was horrendous, but it had also a positive side. That many people started to have a more authentic life in the Heideggerian sense.
Right. That's encouraging to me, because there's so many reasons for people just to go in the opposite direction. Just say, it doesn't matter, let's dance while we can. It'll soon be over. Here's another question I want to ask you on this. Because this is such a powerful part of us, as this book describes, we're all caught up in this. It would seem to me, and I think this is raised here, that it can also, there's an aspect of it that could be a trap. That is to say, a society or a government could manipulate, and probably does in some sense, our dependence upon consumption to define ourselves. If that happens, to the extent that it happens, how does it happen?
Well, in many ways, the government, business, the media can certainly and could all the time manipulate us in many ways, also manipulating or shaping ourselves. The government of a country may become very nationalistic and say that if you are a good nationalist, a good patriot, then that's enough. Okay. A government may turn people from autonomous individuals into a kind of herd animals. You remember Ionesco, the famous play by Ionesco, the rhinos.
Yeah, exactly.
Where people, autonomous people, are turned into herd animals, into rhinos. Or the media can turn a citizen who is responsible for himself, herself, and the country into responsible consumers. So there are many ways of manipulating and shaping people's selves.
Well, it seems to me that the antidote to all those ways has to revolve the critical faculty, the ability of people to think deeply about the choices they're made, to be self-critical, to take responsibility. I think you mentioned earlier that perhaps the better part of the reaction to 9/11 might be encouraging people to examine themselves that way. There has to be that dimension to it.
Yes, but people who are opinion makers, I mean teachers and media people like you, and writers, and the so-called stars, and Hollywood, etc., should have or would have a duty to help people to realize the dangers of manipulation, and also to help them to discover the new opportunities.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, Elemer, because to me the most frightening chapter in the book was the treatment of celebrities. Just how silly it is. I mean, to use a word. The hyperbole that, and you quote extensively from magazines and other sources, this celebrity class that I guess has always existed in the world, but seems now to have almost an altar they're sitting on, strikes me as the antithesis of what you just asked for. I mean, they just seem to be so empty-headed.
Yeah, that's true, but when they are on the screen or on the stage, then they are different. As stars standing before the journalists, they may be silly and empty. But when they play the hero who saves the world or a community, or even the soap operas have a hidden message, and that's one of the messages of the book, that even the most trivial things, for instance in the media, may have, and in this country, most of the television genres have this hidden message. Not so much in Europe. So in this way, America is much better than Europe. There are now lots of books being published on television series and situation comedies, etc. For instance, The Sopranos, which is this famous and successful series. There are two books on this series. One written by a Methodist priest. It's called The Gospel of Tony Soprano, and he proves beautifully that this bloody and monstrous mafioso family, and the Tony, the head of this family, their whole story is the search of a lost Christian soul for redemption, for salvation. So below this bloody and grotesque and absurd story, there is a deep search for human salvation and redemption. And that's true for practically all the genres in this country. But we have to discover it, and schools, I think, should analyze soap operas and series sometimes, or quite frequently, not only the great writers, because there is a message also in these cheap genres.
That's excellent statement. I had not thought about these things. I will think about them now. And the further message of what you're saying is that even in this age where we've essentially sacrificed the transcendental for the momentary, the moment, there's still ways of finding meaning and finding the lessons, the meaning of life. And I guess something else that you say in this book relates to this, that we have to consider the whole as we do this, the whole of the world, the whole of reality, the whole of ourselves, and understand that in dealing with the world we have to deal with both the rational and the irrational. Is this right?
That's right, but the rational and irrational are two words which mean so many things that it is difficult to answer this question. We live in a double world. On the one hand, we live in the so-called information age, where there is only facts and numbers and rational messages are important, or digital codes are important, and at the same time we live in a society of experience, in a kind of re-enchanted society where emotions and myths and mythologies are very important.
This is yes. Now you remind me of the re-enchantment, because we could have when I came to that as a reader, I thought, well, we associate myths, legends, with the old times, with tribal histories and with chivalry and such in our own Western history, but you were saying we have this now. We re-enchant ourselves now. How do we? That re-enchantment is a part of our lives now.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I could try to prove. I might fail, but I could try to prove that the 20th and the early 21st century, there are more myths and mythologies now than in the Middle Ages.
Like what, for example?
Myths are everywhere. In the 20th century, we had, first, on the macro level, we had fascism and Bolshevism. Two mythologies which were absolutely irrational and mythological, with heroes and with the ultimate answers to everything, like a mythology. Or on the lower scale, again, coming back to advertising, I have thousands of commercials and posters and advertisements, which are ordinary advertisements of perfumes or shoes or cars. And I can show that the really successful commercials or advertisements have an underlying archetype or a very deep mythological understructure. Almost each successful advertising has this deep structure.
Is there a quick example?
Oh, sure. One of my favorite advertising is an Yves Saint Laurent perfume poster. There's a lady in black dress holding up her hands and pushing the two walls of darkness aside, and the light is coming in. And usually people think that she is standing in this way because Yves Saint Laurent, that's a Y, so she's just representing the name of the perfume.
Yves Saint Laurent.
Yves Saint Laurent. But the perfume is not about Yves Saint Laurent. It's about a myth, a very old archetype, which comes up in almost all civilizations we know. Which is, and in our own civilization, it is, I think, the 23rd or 24th verse in the Genesis.
Oh my goodness!
That the creation of the world, the second act of the God to create was to divide darkness and light.
I can't imagine a more powerful point upon which to end our conversation. That's just absolutely striking, Elemer.
Yeah.
And for the rest, I encourage people to read this book. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much.
Powerful example.
Thank you very much for the very good questions.
Thank
and
you for
talk.
the book.
Bye.
And that's our program. We appreciate your comments, and you can reach us at dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. I'm George Liston, CA, and you've been watching Dialogue, a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHC Networks. Dialogue's also on the MHC Worldview channel, which is available to public TV stations nationwide. For more information, go to www.mhcworldview.org. Please join us again right here next week, and thank you for watching this week. And Elemer, thank you.
Thank you.